history repeats itself. And in the politics of the Deccan, this has proven true again and again. Sometimes a feudatory defeats his overlord and establishes his own empire. And a few decades later, the same story is written again. Just like once the Rashtrakuta dynasty snatched power from the Badami Chalukya dynasty and established their powerful empire. Now similar circumstances were about to take birth once again. This time, the target was the Rashtrakutas, and the rising power was the Western Chalukya dynasty, whom we also know as the Kalyani Chalukyas. How did this transfer of power happen? What circumstances made a powerful empire weak? And what good and what bad impact did this change have on the history of India? In today's episode, we will understand this story in depth. First, let us go a little back in time. The rule of the Badami Chalukya dynasty lasted approximately from 543 CE to 753 to 757 CE. Their roots were connected to the Bagalkot region of present-day Karnataka, and from there they laid the foundation of their rule. Gradually, their power expanded over Karnataka, Western Maharashtra, Konkan, coastal Gujarat, and many parts of Andhra Pradesh. In South India, they had established themselves as a strong political power. But every power faces a time of testing. These were the same Chalukyas who were eventually defeated by the Rashtrakutas. But this defeat was not the result of one sudden war. Behind it were political struggles, the complexity of the feudatory system, and the gradually rising power of the Rashtrakutas. We have already seen this entire story in detail in the previous episode. If you have not watched that episode yet, I would suggest you watch it, because today's story begins from there. Now begins the age of the Rashtrakutas. The rule of the Rashtrakuta dynasty lasted approximately from 753 CE to 973 CE. Some historians consider it until 982 CE. They were originally connected to the Karnataka region, although some inscriptions also linked them to the Latur region of Maharashtra. Their capital was also located in the south. At their peak, the Rashtrakuta Empire extended from the Gangaimana Doab in the north to Kanyakumari in the south, from Gujarat and Malwa in the west to Vengi in the east. Just imagine an empire that was influencing the politics of the entire central and southern India. But time changes. The balance of power changes. And when the central authority becomes weak, new claimants rise. And now enters the stage the Western Chalukyas. Their period is considered from 973 CE to around 1200 CE, that is, from the 10th to the 12th century. They were also originally residents of the Karnataka region. Their capital was Kalyani, present-day Baswa Kalyan, and their rule was established over the Western Deccan and the main regions of South India, modern Karnataka, Bidar, and Bijapur, meaning once again in South India. The same event was repeated. An old power became weak, and from the same land, a new power rose and took political control. Now the question is, was this just the fall of one dynasty and the rise of another? Or was there a deeper politics of the Deccan, the complex structure of the feudatory system, and a new direction in the history of medieval India hidden behind it? This is what we will understand in detail further in this episode. The land of the Deccan had once seen how a feudatory defeated his overlord and became the master of an empire. When the Rashtrakuta dynasty snatched power from the Badami Chalukya dynasty, perhaps no one had imagined that after the centuries the same story would be written in the opposite direction. In the last decades of the 10th century, the Rashtrakuta Empire looked powerful from the outside. But from within, it had already started cracking. By the time of Emperor Krishna III, the Rashtrakuta Empire was at its peak. He carried campaigns up to the Gangaimana Doab in the north and challenged the Cholas in the south. But after 967 CE, the situation began to change rapidly. After the death of Krishna III, the question of succession became complicated. After him, Khotiga Amogvarsh came to power. During this time, the Parmara ruler of Malwa, Siyaka II, attacked the Rashtrakuta capital Manyakheta. Just imagine. An empire whose armies once marched into North India had its own capital looted. This was not just a military defeat. It was a fall of prestige. And when prestige falls, feudatories do not remain loyal. Among those feudatories was Talapa II. Talapa II was not an ordinary provincial ruler. He belonged to the same Chalukya lineage that had once ruled from Badami. His political identity was not just rebellion, it was a claim of dynastic restoration. Around 973 CE, he defeated the Rashtrakuta Emperor Karkatu. This defeat was so decisive that the Rashtrakuta Empire almost came to an end. 200 years of dominance collapsed within a single generation. But here we must understand one important thing. Talapa did not just win a war, he captured a legacy. He declared himself the legitimate successor of the Chalukya tradition. In his inscriptions, there is clear mention of the glory of the Badami Chalukyas. This was the political use of history. Now the capital changed. Power shifted from Manyakheta to Kalyani. That is why they are called the Western Chalukya dynasty. But the throne of the Deccan was not empty. Sitting on it was difficult, but staying on it was even more difficult. After the fall of the Rashtrakutas, many regional powers began to rise. In the north were the Permaras, in the west the Shilharas, in the south the Cholas, and in the east the Chalukyas of Vengi. Especially in the south, the situation was explosive. At that time, the Chola dynasty was at its peak. Rajaraja I had built a vast empire. The Tamil region, a large part of Sri Lanka, and major sea trade routes were under his control. The Cholas were not only a land power, they were also a naval power. So when the Western Chalukya authority was established, conflict was almost certain. In the early years of his rule, Talapa tried to secure the southern borders. He attempted to re-establish control over the Gangwadi region, which was earlier under Rashtrakuta influence. But the real conflict openly emerged during the time of his successor Satyashree. Rajaraja Chola launched campaigns towards the north. Chola inscriptions claim that they entered deep into Chalukya territories. Some sources even mention an attack up to Kalyani, although historians differ on this point. But one thing is clear. The region of the Tungabhadra and Krishna rivers had become a battlefield. This conflict was not only about territory. It was about supremacy in South India. Deccan versus Tamil power. The war continued for years. Sometimes the Cholas gained advantage. Sometimes the Chalukyas counterattacked. Neither side could achieve a completely decisive victory. And this very conflict made the Western Chalukya administration militarily stronger. They started keeping stricter control over their feudatories. In land grant inscriptions, military obligations are clearly mentioned. This shows that the state structure had become war-oriented. But even in the middle of war, culture did not stop. During this period, a new architectural style developed in the Deccan, which today is known as the Gadag style or the Western Chalukya style. In the temples built in regions like Lakundi, Idgi, and Gadag, you can see a mixture of Dravida and Nagara styles. This architecture was not only about religious faith, it was also a symbol of political stability. The state was sending a message. We are not only warriors, we are also protectors. But the inner question was still alive. Were the Western Chalukyas only there to replace the Rashtrakutas? Or were they truly beginning a new political era? Because in the politics of the Deccan, one rule was clear. Whoever became weak at the center became the next target. The Deccan was no longer stable. It had become an open political battlefield. The Western Chalukya dynasty had established their power, but now they had to prove it. And this test was not of just one generation, it was going to continue for many decades. After Talapa II and Satyashree, power came into the hands of Jayasimha II. This was the time when the politics of the south became even more complex. Because now the field did not have only the Chalukyas and the Cholas. In the east were the Eastern Chalukyas of Vengi, who sometimes aligned with the Cholas, and at other times played a separate role in Deccan politics. This triangular tension became the center of power balance politics in South India. During this period, the Chola dynasty was at its peak. After Rajaraja I, Rajendra Chola I took power, and he carried campaigns not only in South India but even up to the Ganga. Just imagine the Tamil power returning to its kingdom carrying the water of the Ganga. This was not just a military victory, it was a symbolic message. We are the true emperors of the South. But the Deccan did not bow down so easily. Jayasimha took charge against the Cholas. Wars continued constantly, especially in the Tungabhadra region. Sometimes the Chola army entered deep into Chalukya territory. Sometimes the Chalukyas counterattacked and pushed them back. But decisive stability was still far away. Now power came into the hands of Someshwara I. Someshwara I, who is known in history by the title Ayavamalla, reorganized the Chalukya power. He adopted an aggressive policy against the Cholas. During his time, the conflict became even more intense. After Rajendra Chola, during the reigns of Rajadhiraja, and then Rajendra II, the Chola-Chalukya wars reached their peak. The wars of the 1050s were not just border conflicts. They were battles of prestige and of the very idea of empire. There was even a time when the Chola army entered deep into Chalukya territory. Some inscriptions mention attacks up to Kalyani, although historians debate this. But the Chalukyas were not ready to step back. They too launched counter-campaigns towards the south. And then history took an interesting turn. In 1068 CE, Someshwara I, after struggling with long conflicts and illness, took Jal Samadhi in the Tungabhadra river. An emperor who had spent his life in war chose his death also as a symbol. Now the question of power rose again. A struggle began between his sons, Someshwara II and Vikramaditya VI. This was the moment that changed the direction of Western Chalukya history. Vikramaditya VI. This name is a decisive chapter in the politics of the Deccan. In the beginning, he worked like a feudatory under his brother, but gradually he gathered support. He even built diplomatic relations with the Cholas. Yes, the same Cholas with whom wars had continued for years. This was Deccan politics. Here there were no permanent friends or enemies, only interests. In 1076 CE, Vikramaditya VI removed his brother and took power himself. And from here begins the golden age of the Western Chalukya Empire. He started a new era, the Chalukya Vikram era, counted from the beginning of his rule. This was not just a change of power, it was a declaration of confidence. The rule of Vikramaditya VI lasted for almost 50 years, and it is considered the most stable and powerful period of Western Chalukya history. He fought wars with the Cholas, but now the strategy had changed. Less direct confrontation, more limited campaigns. Focus on stability, emphasis on internal administration. During his time, the rise of the Hoysala power began. The Hoysalas were initially feudatories of the Chalukyas, but gradually they began increasing their strength. In the politics of the Deccan, this was a new signal. Just as once the Rashtrakutas were feudatories of the Chalukyas. Then the Chalukyas became feudatories under the Rashtrakutas. Now the Hoysalas were under the Chalukyas. History was again forming a cycle. Culturally, the period of Vikramaditya VI was extremely rich. During this time, Kannada and Sanskrit literature received royal patronage. The poet Bilhana composed the Vikramank Devacharita, praising Vikramaditya VI. This was not just literature, it was the cultural construction of royal legitimacy. Temple architecture reached its peak. The Mahadev temple at Idgi and the Jain temples of Lakundi. These were not only religious places, but symbols of state stability. But every golden age has its shadow. After the long stability of Vikramaditya VI, his successors did not have the same energy. Feudatories once again started becoming powerful. The Hoysalas were slowly moving towards independence. The Kalachuris and other regional powers were also rising. And in the south, the Chola power had not yet completely ended. On the land of the Deccan, the balance of power was once again about to change. The long and stable rule of Vikramaditya VI had taken the Western Chalukya dynasty to the peak of its power. For almost 50 years, his influence in the Deccan remained decisive. But history has a rule. After a strong ruler, often come weaker successors. In 1126 CE, after the death of Vikramaditya VI, exactly what was feared began to happen. His successor Someshwara III was a scholar. He wrote a work called Mansolasa, but he was not an equally powerful military commander. The state was slowly becoming more courtly and cultural rather than military in nature. And at the same time, the feudatories once again began to raise their heads. In the south, a new power was rising rapidly, the Hoysala dynasty. The Hoysalas were earlier feudatories under the Chalukyas. But during the time of Vishnuvardhana and later Narsimha, they increased their military strength. They established control over the Gangwadi region, the same region that had once been the center of Chalukya-Chola conflict. Meaning the same old cycle of the Deccan had become active again. Strong feudatories, weak center. Meanwhile, in the northwest, the Kalchuri dynasty was also looking for an opportunity. Around 1157 CE, the Kalchuri ruler Bijla captured Kalyani. Just imagine, the capital from where the Chalukya power once controlled the entire Deccan. That same capital was now in someone else's hands. This was not just a political event. It was a sign of the complete collapse of central authority. Although after a few years the Chalukyas returned to power, they were no longer the same as before. In the south, the Chola power was also gradually declining. The Pandyas and other Tamil powers were rising. The Deccan and South India were now moving towards a multi-state balance. No single empire remained all-powerful. By the end of the 12th century, the power of the Western Chalukyas had almost ended. In their place, the main powers rising in the Deccan were the Hoysalas and later the Yadavas. But here the most important question is, were the Western Chalukyas only a transitional phase? Or did they permanently change the politics of South India? If we look deeply, their impact was very wide. First, they reorganized the Deccan after the fall of the Rashtrakutas. If Talapa had not taken power at that time, perhaps the Deccan would have broken into many small states. Second, the Chola-Chalukya conflict stabilized the boundaries of South India. The Tungabhadra and Krishna region almost became a permanent dividing line. Third, their architectural style later gave birth to Hoysala art. Without the style of Lakkundi and Idgi, the imagination of Belur and Halebidu would be incomplete. Fourth, the way they organized the feudatory system became the permanent political structure of the Deccan. The same structure later appeared in the Yadava, Kaktiya, and other regional powers. But in the end, what kept happening in the Deccan happened again. From feudatory to emperor. From emperor to weak successor. Then a new feudatory. And then a new empire. When one fell, another rose. When the Rashtrakutas fell, the Western Chalukyas rose. And when the Western Chalukyas fell, the Hoysalas and other powers rose. This is not just the story of dynasties. It is the story of that political structure of the Deccan where power was never permanent. But tradition and legacy always moved forward. And perhaps this is the biggest conclusion of the entire story. History repeats itself. But every time, it adds something new. In the next episode, we will see how the Hoysalas adopted this political legacy, how their art and military power gave a new identity to the Deccan, and how the politics of South India entered a new era in the 13th century. The story is not over yet. The politics of the Deccan is about to change its form once again. If you like this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Do comment and share your thoughts. And also tell us any additional information or insights you may know, because our understanding of history becomes deeper through discussion. And yes, if you like this effort of ours, then do watch our previous and upcoming videos as well. To watch more deeply researched historical stories like this, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any new episode.